Leica finally did it. For many months I was waiting for the SL2 firmware update. Now it's here. It came last week and is a long time ago since the Leica SL2 was brought to market. Everybody had to work still with the original firmware release, and there were quite some features missing and also some issues with pixels. If you want to revisit that, I post links to my video below in the info box. And now it's here, the new firmware update. I think it's a major upgrade, and if you look into the details, how they specify it here, first of all, the long-awaited multi-shot option is finally here. With multi-shot, users can create stacked photos with a resolution up to 187 megapixels. The processing happens completely in camera body, and what they are not saying here, whether this will be stored in the RAW format or just as a JPEG, I will find out. There will be a test shooting, of course, in the next days. We have some improvements in menus here on the video side. We have an improvement on the autofocus field size, which you can set now by a long tap. I will check this out and also show you how this is working in this video here. There are minor improvements like renaming the SD card after formatting the card. There are improvements on the way the electronic contacts work between the M to L mount adapter and Leica M lenses. And people following me on my channel, they know that I use frequently Leica M lenses on my SL2 body. And then some minor corrections here, but in general, since we now have this long announced multi-shot option, I think it's a very interesting firmware update, and of course I have to look into it right now. Let's get started with the video. So how do you get the firmware? You go to the Leica website here, you go to that page I showed in the intro, you scroll down, you find all the specifications here. By the way, you also find some additional information on the multi-shot function, where you get detailed information when and under what circumstances this function can be used. And then you see here the firmware Leica SL2 version 2.0. So you can just download this by one click. You see here the release date was just this month. In 2020, you push the button here and then your firmware gets stored on the computer. You have to place it on your SD card. I have an SD card already taken out of my Leica SL2, and in an SD card reader, you place it on the SD card, and in a moment I'm going to show you how to update the camera in this video. The new firmware 2.0 is now placed on the SD card, which is in the body of my Leica SL2. You go into the menu. You go to the second last page, so let's start this again here. Page number 5. Page number 5 has camera information. Just go into that and you see here camera firmware version is 1.0, and then you can say here start update. Make sure you confirm this here, and then you do, no, we do not save profiles. Make sure you do this here in a way that your battery is fully charged, first of all, that you make sure there are no interruptions, never switch off your camera when you do a firmware upgrade, and just let the camera do its work. You will see it here and it will come back at a certain point in time. Then you can switch it off and on again, and then the new firmware should be installed. I'll come back when the process is finished. And by the way, it says here already the new version 2.0, which is this long-awaited firmware many people were waiting for in the last weeks, months, and basically since we all knew that there are features missing which have been pre-announced, like the multi-shot option. So I'll be back in a moment and then we look into the new firmware. When the camera has done its work and processed the update file, you will see that screen here says update successful. Please restart the camera. So let's switch this off. Typically here I also take the battery out for a moment and insert it. I skip this now. It's just a habit of myself and it's not necessary. So let's switch the camera on. And now we should see this animation, which you typically get. Here it is. That's when you start the camera the first time. It's a nice animation. Leica SL2, warm welcome, of course. Leica is greeting you. And then you start the setup process from scratch again. When the camera, before it started the update process, asked me whether I want to store my profiles, I said intentionally no. Of course, if you want to store your profiles, you should do that. Why I made it a habit not to do it is because the best way to get to know a new firmware is to go through all the menu entries again. You can do this very quickly if you know your camera well, but it is helpful in order to see what new features have been embedded into the camera. So let's quickly start it now. We have English here. We skip the connection to the Leica Photos app, and we have, that we also switch off for a moment. Let's check the time zone. This is still correct. Let's go, daylight saving time is okay. Date setting 21st of June is fine. And let's quickly check the time. Yes, 5 p.m. or 1 is also fine. So that all looks good. So we can get out of that initial menu here and go back to the status screen. So let's look at the first change here in that new firmware 2.0. As people know, you can swipe to change into video mode from photo mode. If you swipe again, you go back to photo mode. Swiping again brings you back to video mode. And if you change between those modes, you can recognize them easily because in the photo mode, everything is in a black background, and in video mode, you have this white background here, for instance, showing the micro level here and everything. And what changed in the new firmware is that if you now go into the video mode menu by pushing the menu button, you get this white header here. And that white header here is not there if you are in photo mode. So let's swipe back to photo mode, go into menu, and then everything is black. So that's now consistent. If you're in photo mode, your status screen is with a black background and all your menu pages are with a black background. And if you are in video mode, you have the white background here, very eye-catching. You immediately see you are in video mode, so nothing can happen. You cannot make mistakes here. And if you are in the video mode, everything has this white header background color here, which is nice. So you always recognize in the menu, you are in the video mode and not in the photo mode. If we swipe back to photo mode, the menu has this black background on the header, and you know that you're in photo mode. After new firmware has been installed, everything is set back to default values. And that's why you can also store your profile in that section, which I skipped, because I want to quickly scroll through the menu entries anyway if I have installed a new firmware. But you will be in P mode when you switch this on after firmware upgrade the first time. So let's go into manual mode here. And then we are back to where I usually are. You have intelligent autofocus here. Let's go back to autofocus single. And you have to adapt your camera then from scratch. But as I said, it's a good way to actually get familiar with new menu entries and discover new features in a new firmware. That's why I rather spend, let's say, the 10-15 minutes going through everything again instead of just storing my user profiles and then uploading them back again when the firmware update is completed. So let's stay for a moment in autofocus single and let's go to a different way here. So let's say we have here, you have all the usual stuff here, face and body tracking, everything. Let's go into field and let's keep field for a moment. So now you get your autofocus field here. So you can focus, you see when it has focus, it turns to green. And now you can change the size of the autofocus field by just long pressing on that button here. You see there are now little red triangles, and with that control wheel here, the rear control wheel, you can control this to small, medium, large, medium, small, medium, large. And that just gets activated by a long press on that field here. So here again, we are back, we can change this, and that's something which is new in the new firmware. And I think it's very convenient if you go for field autofocus. Now let's quickly scroll through the menu entries here and let's see what changed. And if we start and skip the status screen, we go to page number 1. We have here drive focus, focusing. That all looks pretty much the same to what we had before. Let's quickly adjust this here. So drive modus is fine, focusing, autofocus single field, focus assist, auto magnification on, focus peaking red, high, that's like I had it before. Exposure metering, I typically go to spot because I want to know where my camera is metering light. Auto ISO, I will later change. We are a customized button. Auto ISO setting up to 6400 is fine. 1/15 based on, let's say, in-body image stabilization, also fine. Let's continue. It doesn't look as if a lot of things would have changed here, and I come to that in a moment. So you have here long exposure noise reduction. You can switch this on and off, which is very convenient. You cannot do this in, let's say, other Leica cameras typically, and that's very good. You also have here your other menu entries. Auto review I do on permanent here. JPEG settings is large, that's fine. I want the RAW file and the JPEG, that's why we have the digital negative here. Auto white balance fine, floating ISO. I explained this in a different video, what it is doing. Looks all fine and very familiar. Shutter type hybrid, also good. You can go to mechanical, electronic and hybrid. Looks very familiar. Flash settings we do not need here. We are on 35mm, so full frame format here. 3:2 aspect ratio, fine. Storage options, I like to have backup typically. That secures, you know, or let's say mitigates certain risks of losing photos by a damage on one SD card. Then you have here your customized controls like always. I think I have comprehensive videos on all these topics on my channel, so people can look this up. Display settings, Leica photos, image stabilization. If you go to the top here, on of course, that looks all very good. Let's try format SD card in a second, because that was something they mentioned in the firmware update. So that all looks very, very familiar. So where is the multi-shot option? And if we go to the menu entry first to drive mode, people familiar with Leica know that they pack a lot of stuff into the drive mode. And here I have single, continuous, low, medium, high speed, very high speed, self-timer. And the long self-timer, interval shooting, we had this before, exposure bracketing, very familiar, and then here is multi-shot. And if you go to multi-shot, there are two menu entries. You can have a self-timer, and you can take this in high consistency with what we have on the drive mode between, let's say, to 2 seconds, or you can toggle it to long, 12 seconds. And then we also have here a motion artifacts correction. I'm going to review the multi-shot option in a different video because I don't want this video to become overly long, but I'm going to look into it. In the next days, I will post a video. I will show people the differences. Is it really bringing over this 187 megapixel resolution, and how is the quality and how is the camera dealing with motion artifacts? In particular, if you would take photos at night, it's long exposures, you know, clouds will move, certain things will move, and how is the camera when it processes and stacks these images in body dealing with motion? I'm very excited to try this out. Stay tuned on my content and subscribe to my channel, and then you will get notified if you click on the bell when the video is out in order to follow my exploration of the new firmware. So if I go into the menu and go to page 5, I find format card here, and I checked that there is no image material on my two SD cards, which I have not stored somewhere else. You need to check that, of course, before you format your SD card. Let's go to yes. So this is formatting indicated by that, you know, flashing red light here. And that's the first one. Let's do the second one. And then according to the specifications of Firmware 2.0, when I next insert my SD card into the computer, actually it should be called Leica SL2. What Leica also fixed is the distance scale here on the top display and the depth of field in the way they measure front and back. And I'm now here in manual focusing. And in manual focusing, I've chosen now the widest open aperture of f2.0 on that aposumicron 35mm. And if you turn the focus ring here, nothing happens on the top display. But if you push down that button halfway, you see now here scale, which changes. So for instance, let's say we focus at, look at the middle focus here, we go to 5 meters. It's actually very precise how these lenses are focusing manually. I love it. It's very smooth. It's very precise. So we now have a focus sitting on 5 meters, and we have a depth of field from 4.5 meters to 5.6 meters. And that's in combination with an aperture of 2.0. Now, if we close the aperture more, that depth of field should increase. So let's go to, let's say, an aperture of f8. Let's do the same exercise, halfway pushing down the shutter button, and you see now we have 3.5 meters to 8.6 meters. So the depth of field has increased in line and in consistence with a more closed aperture. Let's go up to an aperture of f16, Pressing the shutter button halfway down, we see the focus still sits at 5 meters, but now we have a depth of field from 2.7 meters up to 31 meters. So everything in between 2.7 and 31 meters is now in focus. And that's very good. They fixed this. These numbers have not been precise before. What many people don't know, this also works in the autofocus section. So you cannot see this because I have to go down for a second. Let's go into autofocus now. And let's go into autofocus single. And now if you press the shutter button again, nothing happens. But if you give a slight push to the focus ring, you see that also here you get the information where the focus sits and what your depth of field is. So in this case is, you know, from 2.2 meters to 8.6 meters. And of course, if we now open the aperture to f2.0 and we slightly go onto the focus ring here, we see that the depth of field has been narrowed significantly according to a much wider open aperture here. So that's a nice feature. They fixed this. They claim in the specifications of Firmware 2.0 that this has been made precise now. And it's very helpful, of course, if you see on the top display of the camera what your depth of field is exactly and where the focus is sitting. So when the Leica SL2 was introduced to market, and I mentioned that before, and I also posted the video in the info box below, I found certain pixel issues at long exposures. So what I did here is I set the camera up for manual focus for an aperture of f4 and for a 60-second exposure and an ISO value of 400. Or maybe we should go to the native ISO value of the sensor, which is 100. That should actually be the best result. Or coming from the other side, if we get issues there, we will have issues everywhere. So that's the situation. Let's go to a timer. Self-timer of, let's give it 12 seconds so we have time to cover the camera. And now we'll take a 60-second exposure with an ISO value of 100 at an aperture of f4. And then we check whether we still have this, what I called quote-unquote pixel rain on the images as processed in the camera. So let's hit the shutter button. Releasing in 10 seconds. I have a box here. I place this under the box to make sure there is no light coming in. And let's see what we get. So I've imported the file we just shot with 1 minute exposure. So you see here 60 seconds at an aperture of f4 with the native ISO of the sensor 100. And I've imported this into Lightroom. And now let's see if we go into the develop section and start to magnify this, if we still have these, let's say, pixel rains as we had them before in these exercises in the videos whose link I posted below in the info box. So let's go with the mouse to that thumbnail. Let's push magnification 1 on 1 and let's scroll through the image, and what we see is pitch black darkness. Not a single pixel illuminated where it shouldn't be. Everything is dark the way it should be. The pixel rain, my pixel issue, which I posted right when the camera hit the market, is completely fixed. Thank you, Leica, for that. I like it a lot. And just to be on the safe side, I wanted to take a second picture where I also had the lens hood on the lens and that black box over the camera to make sure no light is falling on the sensor. And did a second example here. So this time, if you look into the metadata here, 120 seconds. So that's 2 minutes at an aperture of f4 and at an ISO value instead of 100 of 400. And I just imported the raw file here. So let's go into the develop section. Let's get this picture big. Let's do the same what we did before. Let's magnify this. And as you see here, we can scroll through that image. It's pitch black and just the way it should be. I'm so excited that Leica finally fixed it, and I knew it from scratch. When I posted quite some months ago that pixel issue with my Leica SL2, I said, this is a firmware issue. Guys, you can fix it, you can do it, and it should not have been released in that way, that you have a pixel rain of hot pixels, you know, whatever it was, over the screen if you take long exposures at night. And now it's completely fixed. If you look into the magnification section here, I scroll through the image, there are no more pixels here. And of course, I have turned noise reduction on in the camera because that's essential. Clearly, if a sensor is, let's go back to the metadata here, if a sensor is taking light in for 120 seconds with an ISO of 400 or maybe even higher, clearly the sensor becomes warm, and that creates just these pixel errors which happen on the sensor. But the purpose for noise reduction is exactly to get these pixels out. And until today, I had to do this in Capture One with the single pixel correction slider. Now this is done automatically by the firmware. Congratulations, Leica, you came to the spot where you should have been from scratch, but I'm very happy to have this now in the new firmware update. I conclude the video here. I hope you liked my comprehensive review of the new firmware 2.0 of the Leica SL2. Everything I asked for has been fixed. There are good new features, there are no more pixel issues, and everything is working as it should. If you liked my video, I'm always grateful if you drop me a thumbs up, and as mentioned before, subscribe to my channel to stay tuned. Thanks for watching and peace out.